So welcome to today's webinar. I think we all know where we are. This is the How DVR and Schools Work Together for Youth presentation from Wisconsin Facets for Tuesday, April 21st, and we thank you for joining us. Just a couple of preliminary announcements before we get to content. First, the webinar, as I mentioned, will be recorded, and you'll be provided a link to that via email from GoToWebinar that will be embedded in the email about an hour after today's webinar concludes. And in that same email, you will also receive an evaluation to a SurveyMonkey that you can tell us what you thought of the presentation, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And above all else, we want to thank you for participating, because this is something of an experiment that we're doing, converting like a self-advocacy training to a webinar in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that everybody is challenged during this time. We want you to know that all our webinars continue for free as scheduled, just this way. And our Wisconsin Facet is open and available to answer special ed related questions, and that toll-free number is 877-374-0511. I can also type that in the chat box if it would be helpful for folks. And if we're unable to download from GoToWebinar the handouts for today's presentation, I've typed my email address in the chat box, and I will send those handouts to you. So without further ado, we're going to get into content, and I'm going to turn things over to our presenter, DVR counselor Jolene Cooley from the Wisconsin Division of Vocational Rehabilitation.
All right. Good afternoon. Just a little background information about me. I have been working for DVR going on 12 years. 11 of those years I have been working with high school students, helping to introduce them to DVR services, developing their individualized plans for employment to get them on their journey to their professional career. Similar to how we all have a starting point where mine was at Hardee's. I'm mainly a counselor in the Workforce Development Area 2, so that is consistent of Milwaukee County. First thing I would like to talk about, for those that might not know about, is kind of what DVR is. DVR, or the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, we work with individuals with disabilities who have barriers to either getting a job, keeping a job, or maintaining employment. So those eligible for our services, they're going to be the ones who get the services. And those can be, but not limited to, what you see on the screen, so the vocational counseling and guidance, skills development. We also, if they want help finding their first job, to kind of get them into that pathway, that journey towards work. Also, if there's any education that's necessary to help achieve those employment goals and supported employment. The first step interest is for those who want DVR services. We usually, with high schools, we like to have them 2 years exiting high school, or kind of that junior year, to start applying for DVR services. There we have ways to do it. They can either go online and fill out an online referral. You can contact your local DVR office, and you can request a paper one to be sent to you. For applicants who are under the age 18 and those who aren't their own guardian, they would need to have their legal guardian to be able to sign all of the paperwork and documents for DVR. That's the first step to get into DVR. The next step after filling out the application is the eligibility process. Anyone could benefit from DVR services, but those who qualify for our services are going to be the ones who get it. We need documented medical or psychological disability information that prevents the barriers to employment. So it could be information from your doctor, the school IEP, if they're seeing a therapist or psychologist, information from there. Our eligibility interview process is through SBRI. It would be a phone interview that they would go and ask the questions to determine if they're eligible for DVR services. They submit it back to DVR, and a counselor is the one who makes the final eligibility determination. There could also be an orientation or an initial meeting to talk about DVR services to see if this is something that's the right fit for you. Once an individual is eligible for services, we look into what we call our order of selection, or the OOS. Per the federal government, if we have a wait list for services, those with the most significant disabilities are the ones who get DVR services first. And in our order of selection, we have 3 categories. And how those categories are determined is that we look at 7 functional areas that could have a limitation to employment. For mobility, communication, self-care, self-direction, interpersonal skills, work tolerance, and work skills. If an individual has 4 or more of those 7 areas identified, they're going to be in Category 1. Presently at this time, there is no wait list for Category 1, and those individuals are receiving DVR services right away. Category 2 is if they have 1, 2, or 3 functional areas that need to be addressed, they're in Category 2. Or if they're receiving SSI or SSDI, they're presumed eligible in Category 2. At this time, there is no wait list for Category 2. Those individuals are getting services right away. In Category 3, they have a disability, but it might not have a serious limitation or more functional areas. They could not require 2 or more services. The services could take less than 6 months. Those individuals in Category 3. So that one is the one that has the wait list for services. But for the majority of people who apply for DVR services and are eligible, we've been seeing them in Category 1 or Category 2, so they're able to get services right away. If it is in Category 3, they would have to wait to be activated from the wait list in order to start receiving services. With DVR, we have something called an Individualized Plan for Employment, or an IPE, which can be kind of confusing because in school they have that Individualized Education Plan, the IEP, so it can sometimes get confusing. What our plan for employment is, it kind of steers towards what that job goal is, that long-term goal that matches their interests, their abilities. We also look at the labor market. Is this an in-demand job? Is it growing? Or is it one of those where the jobs are slowly declining over the years? With students, they might have like a long-term job. Let's say they wanted to be a lab technician, but they wanted a job now. And maybe they want to work at like a Hardee's or a McDonald's or a Subway or a retail store. We can help them find that now job while we're working also towards that long-term job that goes from there. Within WIOA, we call a student is anyone from the ages of 14 to 21 if they're in high school or an education training program, so maybe Job Corps, or if they're in an 18 to 21 program within the school, those would be our students with a disability. These are the ones that, so you might have heard the word PREET around the pre-employment transition services. So those students with a disability, these are the 5 categories in which those pre-employment services can fall under. Within WIOA, DVR has to spend like 15% of our budget is allotted for these pre-employment transition services. Some of the services that could fall in there is the vocational counseling and guidance they receive from their DVR counselors, work incentive benefits for those who have SSI, the student work-based learning, so to help them find a job while they're in high school, self-advocacy, project search. We could do temporary work experiences, trying out different types of jobs. A lot of these would fall under that pre-employment transition services. Other things that would be have.
Jolene, I'm going to stop you there. I made a mistake because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to launch the poll, so I've launched it early. But just to let you know, or anyone who hasn't voted, I'm seeing 80% have voted. And most of the people on the call right now appear to be professionals, because not applicable for having an open DVR case won the poll, 33% voted no, and 17% listening said they have an open case. So that is just an FYI at this point, but you may continue, and I'll close the poll and it will share your screen.
All right. And I am sorry, Matthew, I blew right past that poll too. So the other kind of services we'll have another one later on, but now I know exactly how and when to tee it up, so that will be okay. Okay. So those that other services that we have is something with supported employment or customized employment. These are for our consumers that we work with that have pretty significant limitations, barriers to employment. They are working with a service provider to kind of help them like get a job within the community. They would provide that on-the-job support by a job coach. They'd also try to build in natural support, and this is job coaching that can go for months to years. Usually, they would look to see if they have contracted with the Aging Disability Resource Center, so like IRIS or Family Care, sometimes to transition to those long-term supports. Or in some cases, they're able to transition to 100% natural support. It's all going to depend on that individual. With supported employment or customized employment, the job must pay minimum wage. What is the minimum wage rate for that job? So they're not going to get paid less, and it's going to be an integrative, competitive employment, so not one where they're only working with people also with significant disabilities. Customized employment is part of the supported employment. It's just a little bit more unique because it's not with the traditional job development where you're looking at job leads and things like that. Customized employment looks at the individual, kind of what their strengths are, and they're building a job out of an employer's unmet needs. So that process might take a little bit longer, just because you're creating a job that essentially is not in a job lead. You're trying to develop it with employers. All right. The last part within DVR is the end is the case closure. The goal of DVR is to close their case successfully employed once that individual has maintained a community integrated employment for at least 90 days. So the consumers within supported employment and customized employment, it would be 90 days after we transition them to long-term support or like natural support, however that might look. This is not including like the students who they might have a longer-term goal that might involve post-secondary, but we're helping them find like a now high school job. That case closure, we wouldn't look to close that case at that time. DVR might provide post-employment services if they need just a short-term help after case closure. That's usually within like the first quarter after closure. And with DVR, they are able to reapply for services at any time. It's not a one-time shop. You can, as long as you need DVR services to help you with employment, they can reapply as many times as they need. So looking at, when it's talking about the pre-EPs in the schools, the transition legislation, with WIOA, what had happened, it reauthorized the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It also had a very strong focus on the transition and the students. So the spending requirements for the pre-employment transition services or those pre-EPs, and are potentially eligible. That would be a student with a disability but has not had an eligibility determination made, might qualify for some of those pre-EP services too. Also within the transition legislation within WIOA was the Section 511 were the limitations on that sub-minimum wage. And then this is just, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, there is a Wisconsin Transition Action Guide. It's one of those living, breathing documents. It supports an interagency agreement between DVR, DHS, DPI, and has agreements and outlines for roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders. The stakeholders is the student, teacher, parents, DVR, if they have a long-term care, mental health system, the ADRCs. So those could be the potential stakeholders depending on who's in the student's team. Within DVR, we can also do something called an employment planning consultation. So that's like where DVR could come to an IEP meeting, but they might not be eligible or applied for DVR services yet, but we could potentially attend that IEP meeting to give information about labor market information, employment training, provide any kind of counseling advice, things from that they might need. And this can be done outside of an application. So if it's like a sophomore or freshman and they want like a DVR service there, and that's not saying that if you are to request DVR to be there, I mean, we try to make every IEP meeting I can, but realistically within my day-to-day, I can't attend every IEP that I've been invited to, but there is that option. I feel like we've already talked about, so then also within attending those IEPs, we can explain the DVR program, again, offer post-secondary employment goals, services, share information. So, and then anything with disabilities, so adaptive technology accommodations, things like that. So there's things that we can do in attending the IEP. If they can't be there in person, sometimes we can try to see if we can be over the phone or some sort of virtual attendance. And in the cases where we just can't attend either in person or on the phone, we can also just kind of share that information with the school to be shared at the meeting. So then kind of talked about this in the beginning, but again, when to get involved, looking at that 2 years before high school completion or that junior year. Sometimes in some cases it could be earlier. Consult with your local DVR office to ask about that. Again, the WIOA age range for a student with a disability is 14 to 21. And then with the school IEP, that transition planning that the schools are going to be working at starts at age 14. But the academic career planning for all students would begin in 6th grade within that WIOA. So a lot of that, you might be having them to start thinking about career paths and interests and things like that. Guys, we'll pass the poll again. Okay, this is going to be fun. So this is kind of like some areas of how DVR and school can collaborate for those pre-employment services to kind of help best the student. There's like work experiences, whether if it's through the school or DVR, to get them developing those work skills, those soft skills. When I say soft skills, I mean like showing up on time. You know, what is their outgoing message on their voicemail saying? You know, how you interact with coworkers and things like that. Things that we learn by working. We can do like a job coach if it's a school work experience and you need some additional one-on-one support. We have like self-advocacy classes or skills to pay the bills that can talk about, you know, professionalism, networking, things like that. And then during the summer, if they want a summer work experience, because some students don't want to work while they're in school, but they're free for the summer and they'd like to have a job, that can build those experiences. And then the next two slides, which will also be in your handout, are some WIOA school resources that you might not be aware of, as well as general resources within the DVR referral, our job center for Wisconsin that has workshops like resume development, things like that, as well as computers that people can use to apply for jobs, things like that. The job accommodation network, that can kind of think about accommodations that you need for specific like disabilities, what kind of accommodations you'd be able to ask for.
So one of the questions we had for you as an audience, and I think I know where this might be headed, but we're going to launch another poll now regarding if anyone has had DVR in their child's IEP meeting. So I'm going to launch this poll now, and then I'll monitor people voting. So we're currently at 86% having voted. I'm just going to give it a Another 10 seconds or so here. This may be some people have stepped away from the webinar for the time being. I'm going to go ahead and close this. It's been up for a little more than a minute. We had the poll results show 31% said yes, and 38% said no among those who have had an IPE at some point. Jolene, do you have anything you want to say about how that typically breaks down? You sort of addressed it earlier in the presentation, but do you have anything else you want to say about that?
I've had with some of my schools in the Milwaukee area where they really wanted DVR at the table. Mr. Kobe Jackie had emailed me and said, "What is your availability? I need you at this IEP meeting." And they worked it around like my schedule. Other ways to do it is sometimes we don't get the invite in a timely manner. I've gotten invites sometimes that were after the IEP, sometimes 15 minutes before the IEP. So in some of those cases, it's hard to, well, especially when it was past the invite. But I know with teachers, it's hard too because you're trying to coordinate all those different people within the meetings and then waiting for that permission for DVR to be in the meeting in order to share that invite. Other times it could be, like I know with my schools within the Milwaukee area, it's done because we're so close together geographically. We might have like monthly meetings out there, so then we can be able to talk to DV about DVR if we're unable to make it to the IEP meeting, or sometimes I followed up with the parent because they wanted a conversation and I couldn't be there present. So sometimes there could be creative ways in order to share the information about DVR if we physically or virtually can't be at the IEP meeting.
Okay, and those of our respondents who voted yes to the poll, if you want to type a comment about the experience of having a DVR counselor in your child's IEP meeting, feel free to do so, and we'll kind of dialogue around it a little bit. If not, that's okay too, of course, but I'm monitoring that now. Jolene, go ahead.
What would you like me to go ahead with?
Okay, we've come to the end of the slides. Now, what I'm going to attempt to do is to launch the latest DVR 101 video that is up on DVR's website, and we can send you a link to it if it does not work via the webinar, but I'm going to attempt to launch that now. So, Jolene, I'm going to take control again.
Okay.
And this will give our audience time to ponder questions or comments.
I had a lot of things I wanted to do this past time. I'm sure I'm pretty much I like it so much. DVR stands for the Department of Emotional Rehabilitation, Chronic Development, Vocational for work, rehabilitation. DVR works
Are there any other questions, thoughts?
I was just going to say, as I unmuted myself, what I like about that video is that it reflects that DVR services are designed to be self-directed and consumer-driven, and it weaves consumers' testimony about DVR and success stories from it. Not sure if everyone was able to hear the video. It looks like we had one person commenting, but I'm just going to check for other questions again. Looks like it does say there was no sound on the video, so apologize for that. It didn't upload correctly, apparently into the webinar program, but I'll link that. I'll link to it and email that out to folks following the webinar, even before the email with the recording and SurveyMonkey link in it.
Matthew,
So,
I'll even
Julie,
share with you a link. There's one that's specific for youth in transition, a video. I'll share you the link for
Okay.
that one too.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Any other closing comments you would like to make?
If there's any questions, if you have any other concerns that you think about afterwards, you have my contact information. You can give me a call. You can also call your local DVR office, or if there's a counselor that's working within your school, we're glad to help answer any questions that you might have or get you information you're looking for.
All right, sounds good. And Jolene, thank you for taking your time during these busy, chaotic times to present this information. It's a good refresher for me as a professional, and hopefully our audience has learned something. And parents, no matter how old your kids are, we hope that you've had some good takeaways from today's presentation. And I'll be in touch with some follow-up links shortly then. Thank you for joining us, and don't forget to log on to wifacets.org, the training page, to see our full complement of free workshops and webinars upcoming. Thank you, and stay healthy, everybody.